I was going through Jehovah's Witnesses website, and I came across this bit about doomsday predictions. Naturally, being the kings of doomsday predictions, I got curious. I took a look at all the doomsday predictions Jehovah's Witnesses have made from their inception in the late 1800s to now. By the way, I'm having a meetup in Lincoln, Nebraska on June 30th. It's only one night. We'll be at a park hanging out. I'm selling tickets so I can cover the cost of the shelter and the food and the everything. We'll be grilling. So if you want to come, check out the link in the description or the card in the corner. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, let's take a look at the history of Jehovah's Witnesses and a list of their failed predictions. As I said a minute ago, they have 30 of them. More than that, actually. Those are just the most significant failed predictions. They have an active prediction going right now, which is inevitably going to fail too, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, as far as their predictions go, a lot of the major ones were based off of some Bible math. I talked about this in a recent video, but I'm going to cover it just in case somebody missed it. Religion was getting a start in a big way in the US during the 1800s. The 1820s saw the founding of Mormonism with Joseph Smith, and a group called the Millerites were growing and making end times predictions of their own. Jehovah's Witnesses didn't exist yet, but the Millerites came up with this Bible math by taking these 3 verses from 3 different books of the Bible and jamming them all next to each other. When they took those verses and assumed that they're referencing each other, in kind of a Bible code conspiracy theory, they came up with a date. There were a number of different convoluted ways to calculate the years and starting date from which to start counting the years, and if you're interested, here's the chart. But ultimately, the Millerite Church ended up settling on the date 1844. Their members sold all their stuff and donated it to the church in preparation for the day, because why would they need it anyways? The end of time was about to happen, and the church needed to spread their message to the most people, right? So 1844 rolls around, and guess what? Nothing happens. Of course, there were riots. People completely disintegrated over it. It got really ugly. It's famously known as the Great Disappointment. You can Google that and find all kinds of information on it. That was the end of the Millerite Church in its current form. From there, it split into factions. There were 3 main camps. The first camp believed that the Millerites thought the math was fake. It didn't even exist. The second group believed that they had the math mostly right, but it needed to be tweaked. Maybe start from a different starting point or something like that. Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists branched off from this group. And the third camp believed that something did happen. Maybe Jesus came back invisibly or something. And fascinatingly, there's a group called the Baha'i Faith in the Middle East that's a Christian group. And it was a branch off from Millerites that believed that they had the math right and something legitimately did happen in 1844. It's a very small group, and naturally, being a Christian group in the Middle East, it's pretty oppressed. They think that in 1844, Jesus came back in the form of their leader, named Bab, but the Baha'i Faith is a story for another time. As I was saying about Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists, the founders actually went to a Millerite church together for a while. Ellen G. White, the founder of Seventh-day Adventists, and Charles Taze Russell, the founder of Jehovah's Witnesses, knew each other. And you can see a lot of Millerite influence on both of the religions. Okay, now that we have their history down, let's talk about Jehovah's Witnesses' end times predictions. I got this list from jwfacts.com. It's a really good website that's been around since long before I left the religion, and it's still functioning today. They do really good work. A link can be found in the description. Their first notable end time prediction is right when the religion was founded. At that time, it was called the Bible Students, and the prediction was for 1880. They believed that all the quote-unquote signs of the times had started. Earthquakes, war, pestilence, all that stuff. Surprise, there have been earthquakes, wars, and pestilence since the dawn of time. Then they had one in 1881, which said that the sealing of the 144,000 would be complete. Quick reminder, the 144,000 in Jehovah's Witnesses religion is a group of people who believe they're going to be raptured to heaven when Armageddon starts. Everybody else is going to live in a Garden of Eden-like paradise on earth. But that belief didn't come until later. Up to this point, they still believed that everybody involved in the religion was one of the 144,000, and they were going to heaven. The next prediction was 1906. They clustered all of them right on top of each other here. The next few are based on that Bible math we talked about earlier. The next failed predictions happened in 1910, 1914, and then 1915, and then Charles Taze Russell died on Halloween night, 1916. If you're interested, here's a picture of his grave. Interesting symbols and shapes going on there. But he did make some of the ensuing predictions before he died. His last prediction was for 1917. After he died, Joseph Rutherford became the de facto head of the religion at that point. So from there, Rutherford made a prediction for 1918, then 1920, 1921, 1925, and then 1932. That catches us up to the point where there was a power struggle in the religion, and Rutherford did what amounts to a hostile takeover of the Bible students, and renamed it to Jehovah's Witnesses. The Bible students, as a religion, still exist today. There are a lot of similarities, but the most notable difference, at least to me, is that they think every single one of them is going to heaven. Jehovah's Witnesses and Bible students both think there will be 144,000 people who go. There just aren't 144,000 Bible students in existence at this point. Anyways, up to now, some of these failed predictions were more notable than others. The amount of time and work spent building certain dates up, or the embarrassment of their failures, probably played into why they decided to stick to certain dates like 1914. Instead of sweeping that one under the rug, they kept it, and they did exactly the same thing that some Millerites did after the Great Disappointment, claim that Jesus did come back after all. We just didn't know it. Another really prominent date was 1918. Eventually, they worked the date 1919 into their doctrine, claiming Jesus picked the Watchtower Society as God's chosen organization on earth. In the book they wrote called Vindication 1, 1931, page 338 and 339, they mention the failed predictions. They said, "There was a measure of disappointment on the part of Jehovah's faithful ones on earth concerning the years 1914, 1918, and 1925, which disappointment lasted for a time. Later, the faithful learned that these dates were definitely fixed in the scriptures, and they also learned to quit fixing dates for the future and predicting what would come to pass on a certain date." End quote. Okay, so this brings us up to 1932 and Rutherford's power struggle for the religion. After that, Rutherford made another prediction for 1935. Remember how one of their early predictions was about sealing the 144,000? Well, that was moved up to 1935. That's what this prediction was about. Next came the 1940s. It was a lot more vague this time. They didn't specify a day or year. It was just the 1940s. I imagine it had something to do with World War II. Rutherford was, after all, an admirer of that well-known dictator from Germany. Even wrote a letter to him, gushing about how he supported what he was doing. I'll read a few excerpts. This is a letter from the Watchtower Society to the leader of Germany in World War II. I tried to figure out what year it was written, but I couldn't find it. Sometime between 1933 and 1944. It's pretty long. I'm putting a link to the full translated letter in the description too. Also from JW Facts. Here's an excerpt. "The Brooklyn headquarters of the Watchtower Society is pro-German in an exemplary way, and has been so for many years. For that reason, in 1918, the president of the society and 7 members of the board of directors were sentenced to 80 years in prison because the president refused to use 2 of the magazines published in America under his direction for war propaganda against Germany." Here's another excerpt, just a little further down. "The Bible researchers of Germany are fighting for the very same high ethical goals and ideals, which also the national government of the German Reich proclaimed, respecting the relationship of humans to God, namely, honesty of the created being towards its creator. They actually tried to form a strong relationship with Germany and claimed a lot of their ethical goals, including hatred for certain people that necessarily came with the territory." Okay, let's continue on. The next failed prediction they made was in 1951, and then one of their biggest and most famous failures, 1975. They thought this one was a for sure thing because it had been 6,000 years from the creation of Adam, and they thought that God works in sevens. Since God worked for 6 days to create everything and then rested on the 7th day, they thought it would transfer. God lets the world survive for 6,000 years and then destroys it. They started changing all the wording in the literature from "the end is near," which is what they've always done and what they do now, to "the end is here." They had a famous phrase, "stay alive to 75. If you're on your deathbed, just make it 1 more day, 1 more week, 1 more month." So after that fell completely flat, people started hemorrhaging. They were losing numbers like mad. And they used the Bible verse Matthew 24:12 to justify it. It says something different than what was quoted to us, though. They always said a sign of the last days is that the greater number will cool off, i.e., people will start leaving the truth in droves. That's how you know the end is near. The verse actually reads, "And because of the increasing of lawlessness, the love of the greater number will grow cold." At any rate, that's what they used to explain why people were leaving the religion, and saying it's just another sign the end is near. After that, they made another end-of-the-world prediction in 1980. and another in 1986, and finally, their last failed prediction was 2000. They didn't actually name a date and time for the year 2000, but they said it would be impossible for it to not end before then. By the way, if you want to investigate the evidence for yourself by reading it straight from their literature, follow the link in the description to jwfacts.com. They list it all out with page and paragraph numbers and everything. It's extremely detailed. Now for one final prediction, an ongoing prediction. 2033. This is the second generation teaching, but this is an estimate too. The second generation teaching is really complicated, so I'll see if I can sum it up in a few words. They thought the end was going to come before the last member of the 144,000 who was baptized and anointed before 1914 died off. Well, they use one guy as an example who was baptized and anointed in 1913, but he died in 1992, so they had to modify it. They changed it to mean anybody who was baptized and anointed during the time that this guy, Fred Franz, was alive is in his generation. The end will come before that guy dies. It's called the second generation teaching. And if that doesn't grab you, then here's their other explanation. The Bible alluded to Moses having lived for 120 years, so they used that as a baseline for the length of a generation. They counted forward from 1913 to get to 2033. The end has to come before that, or they have to completely rewrite everything from the ground up. And they're going to lose more members. I mean, this seems kind of convoluted, but it makes complete sense to people on the inside of the religion. It's explained to them before baptism. It's a required part of the lesson. You have to prove you understand most of this stuff before they even approve you for baptism. So it seems convoluted to outsiders, but insiders get it completely. And when the date comes and goes, they're going to be in some deep shit. They've retroactively gone back and changed their literature to say something different before, release new copies and everything. And it's even easier to do now that most of this stuff is digital. So we'll see what happens, but I give them about 15 more years before they have no option but to address it. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. Don't forget to check me out on Patreon. That's how I've been surviving lately because YouTube has been down this month. So if you want to make sure I can continue to do the work I do, then consider supporting me. Also, don't forget to check me out on Teespring, where I sell all kinds of cool merchandise. Also, don't forget to check out my podcast and my Facebook. You get early releases on Facebook, and I talk about all kinds of interesting stuff on the podcast, so go check it out. All links are in the description as always. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.